Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar. My name is Elizabeth Errico, and I am the Executive Director of the Children's Mental Health Resource Center. For those of you who are new to CMHRC, we are a nonprofit charity organization that provides guidance and resources for early identification and management of mood disorders, bipolar disorder, and its new phenotype dubbed fear of harm. We provide a multitude of services for families as well as the practitioners who treat them. These disorders are very isolating for children and families and are complicated for providers to treat. So we at CMHRC are here to break down that isolation and provide the support everyone needs to ensure children get an accurate diagnosis and treatment that works. You can learn more about our programs and services on our website, which is cmhrc.org, and you can make a contribution there to support our work. You can also reach out to us at any time through email to the email address info@cmhrc.org. Now, tonight, I am going to be speaking with two very special guests with decades of experience as mental health providers. As we speak, please feel free to put your questions into the chat. I will be monitoring that and integrating it as we go. So now to introduce these two wonderful women who are joining me is first Jennifer Sevick. She is CMHRC's clinical coordinator. And we have Lisa LeMay, CMHRC's parent liaison. Now, before we really dig into our topic tonight, which is called palliative parenting, I want to give a moment to talk about the word palliative. Many people think of it as being just associated with end-of-life care, but that's actually not what the word means. Palliate means to ease symptoms or to moderate intensity. And when we apply this concept to parenting, we're looking at a definition of palliative parenting that we parent with the primary intention to ease symptoms and improve quality of life, knowing that behavior change will follow. Now, Jen, you were the one who first associated the word palliative with parenting specifically. So I'm hoping you can tell us a little bit about how that evolved for you.
Thank you for asking. So I was sitting in a doctor's office when my son was about 6 years old, and I realized that most of my friends, and probably none of my friends, had to make the same kind of choices and decisions that I was making that would probably impact them for years to come. And so I recognized that what I was doing was basically palliative psychiatry, and that's a real thing. And so later on, when I met with other parents, I realized that what I was doing was palliative parenting, that regardless of where I was, like if I was in a school setting, but I was making decisions about school and friends and activities, and I was always looking at like quality of life.
Can you tell us a little bit about what palliative psychiatry is?
Yeah, so palliative psychiatry is basically the idea is that you're looking at quality of life and you're balancing that with like the side effects of oftentimes the medications or the treatments that you're doing. Some of those medications can have some serious potential side effects, long term or even short term. And so you want to integrate that with like your quality of life, and you kind of try to find a balance between treatment and also still being able to have quality and joy and peace.
And so you were really applying that idea of being able to focus on quality of life to parenting as opposed to trying to eliminate symptoms altogether? How did it connect?
So I just wanted him to have his childhood, and I wanted him to be comfortable and have friends and do things that other kids were doing. But I recognized that that wasn't always going to be the case. And so I had to kind of balance like his quality of life versus the treatment options that we were doing, but that it applied not just medically, but that it also was applying like across the board in every decision that we were making, whether it was like, do we visit the relatives this holiday, or do we choose private school versus public school and the resources that they have available, or even do we go to this birthday party, or do we have to stay home? Like, it really just impacted everything.
So you talk about bringing this to support groups, talking with other parents about it. Lisa, I'm wondering what your response to all of this is.
Well, I can remember when Jen first brought it up in a support group, and I thought, hey, that's what I do. I didn't realize that other people were doing it. I sort of thought I had made it up myself, but was delighted to hear that Jen had coined a term for it. And I think it really fits, because palliative care at the end of life is about quality of life. It's not about trying to extend life or fix or cure. And in the same way, palliative parenting is about quality of life. It's about understanding that our kids with mood disorders have limitations, and we have to accommodate those limitations in order to help them have a better life. And whereas a standard model of parenting, the one that's dominant in our culture, is about setting boundaries and goals for children, and dealing out consequences when they don't meet those goals to try and shape their behavior. Palliative parenting actually starts with, what is the child capable of and what can they actually do, and working within that parameter, and then setting more realistic expectations for them.
You know, that I think is a real struggle for a lot of parents, to reframe their thinking from goals and objectives and accomplishments and achievements to meeting the child where they are at any given moment, and assessing what they're capable of in that time. And it really requires parents to sort of let go of a lot of their own, as you said, expectations. And so I think that's a good opportunity for us to sort of look at this sort of first set of concepts that we have with palliative parenting that involve acceptance. And so, as you can see, there are 5 concepts here. We accept that our children are different and have different needs. We accept that we parent differently because their needs are different. We accept that we let go of our preconceived expectations for our children. We accept that we can't protect our children from the pain of their illness, but we can make their daily lives better. And we accept that inevitably we will make mistakes, and that we forgive ourselves. And Lisa, I'm wondering if you can help our audience understand what this looks like in real life.
Yes, I have so many stories I could tell you, but I will tell you one that's sort of about my transformation from the dominant parenting model to palliative parenting. So, I mean, I grew up like I'm imagining many in our audience did, about where parents set rules and kids followed them. And there really wasn't a whole lot of differing from that at all. And so I thought that's the way I would parent too. And so my daughter started showing symptoms of mental illness when she was about 9. And I can remember a Thanksgiving where I was like plowing ahead with parenting as planned and trying to make her sit at the table with lots of people, even though she doesn't like being around a lot of people, and the smells were bothering her and the noise was bothering her. And I'm just determined that she's going to sit there and she's going to do what she needs to do and, you know, show up as children are supposed to show up at family functions. And this did not work. It ended up with tears and tantrums and leaving the table. And, you know, conversations in the back room, and it really didn't go very well. And so time passes, and I learned some about how to manage and parent differently. And come the next Thanksgiving, I did it totally differently. First of all, we went in 2 cars. My husband took my son and I took my daughter, and that prevented sibling arguments that would set her off before we even started. And it would provide a quick getaway if we needed one. And when we got there, we put her in a room by herself with coloring books, and we let cousins and aunties go in 1 or 2 at a time to be with her. And she got to eat by herself with food that I had picked out and knew that she would eat. And when she was done, we went home. And it was really successful. The relatives were okay with the accommodations and just rolled with it. And everybody got to see her a little bit, and she didn't get super overwhelmed. It was still really challenging for her, but it was doable. And that, I think, illustrates what palliative parenting is all about, is what's doable and what will lead to the most meaning and most fulfillment for our kids.
Jen, I see you nodding along. I want to hear what you have to say.
It's just so relatable. I think everyone has that story of like, we got invited to a birthday party and we have 2 kids, and it's like, oh, but I just know my oldest is not going to be able to do this. So I'm just like, yes, I get it. But I love how this kind of ties like so nicely into like the palliative parenting concepts that we have listed. So it's like, it took time to recognize that she had different needs, and that it was okay to parent her differently, and to accept that things had to be different for her, and that you really had to let go of this picture that you had in your head of what holidays and family gatherings were supposed to be like. Very relatable there. And also, though, recognizing that like your child had limits, so that like when I heard you say like when she had to go, she had to go, and you can't protect her from everything. You can't predict what is going to happen, and can't control those things. You can only control what you can, and you really did such an incredible job. And it sounds like, in that story you talked about the first Thanksgiving, and then you talked about the second Thanksgiving, and it was like being able to recognize that, okay, we didn't know what we didn't know, and I can forgive myself, and I can just move on, and we can move forward and do the best we can.
So I'm listening to you both talk, and I'm finding, as Jen said, so much relatable here. Not just for parents of kids who struggle with mental illness, but parents of kids who have struggles with other kinds of disabilities. But I'm wondering, I can hear in my head sort of criticisms that parents, we've all heard 1,000 times, that we're coddling our children when we do this, that we're not teaching them skills that they will need later in life. And so I'm wondering how you two would answer that criticism. How is this not coddling?
I've thought a lot about this because I've been swimming upstream. My daughter is 16 now, and lots of professionals thought I was coddling. But here's the thing. If she had been able to do it differently, then setting expectations and consequences would have worked. But because she can't do those things, it's not coddling, it's accommodating, which is what we do with people who have disabilities. Just like we build ramps for people that need them to get from ambulatory limitations. So we have to make accommodations for behavior, and those behavior symptoms, and not just willful, I just don't feel like I want to do that today.
I've heard that so many times from other professionals, teachers, or just whoever. And I think that because they're at a loss too to explain what is happening, things from, manipulation to enabling, to that term enmeshment. I was too enmeshed with my child. And what I realized was he's 6, 7, 8, 9. He doesn't have the words, the vocabulary, the experience to be able to do this. So I have to be his voice. This is not manipulative behavior. I'm not enabling or making excuses. I know this child better than anybody else. I know where he's been. I know where he is now. And I have now come to, thanks to all of you, understand his illness a whole lot better. And I can be that advocate and that support person that he needs so that one day, hopefully, he's able to do more for himself.
Yeah, I see a question here from Chris. How can you get schools to buy into this idea? I can only imagine the same criticism from schools. And Chris, we are going to get to that in our sort of third set of concepts. But first we're going to, so I promise we will get there. But first we're going to move into sort of talking about the principles that we have, which is sort of part 2 of palliative parenting. And they are that we recognize our children's symptoms are not willful or deliberate behaviors, which is exactly what Lisa and Jen were just talking about, that we respond to our children's symptoms with empathy and compassion. And we model and teach self-care. We respect our children's journeys as their own. And our goal is the highest possible quality of life for our kids. And, Lisa, when I heard your story about Thanksgiving and your success at meeting your child where she was, and the other things that you both have said here, this idea of that we're coddling children who need something different than other kids might, is something I've spent a lot of time thinking about as well, because I've seen so many times that kids who are struggling and have no control over their symptoms are filled with so much regret and remorse and shame afterwards when they have been unable to live up to the expectations that have been set by them, by others for them, somewhat arbitrarily. I think, when we're trying to apply one standard to all children. But, I'm reminded of a story that I've told over and over and over again about a boy who was about 5, 6 years old, and who was later diagnosed with bipolar disorder, but his family didn't know that was the diagnosis he had at the time. And he was having a symptomatic episode, but his family referred to them as rages because he would become so distraught and dysregulated and aggressive. And in it, during one of these episodes, he said, help me, to his parents. In the middle of this aggressive, destructive, symptomatic episode, his call to his parents was, help me. I look like myself on the outside, but on the inside, I'm gone. And when he was finished having this symptomatic episode, as always, he dissolved into tears, racked with remorse and regret and shame that he had done all of these things and that he had said all the things that he said. And as a parent, I can't imagine not responding to that level of pain in a child with anything other than compassion. If there were anything to demonstrate that the child's behaviors weren't willful or intentional, it would be that level of distress that they feel after the fact that it happened. And I just, I go back to that all the time. And as I say, I tell that story all the time.
I'm just kind of wondering, as you share that one parent's experience that you were aware of and knew, and did they make the connection that they were aware that he wasn't being manipulative, you know, he wasn't trying to be sneaky, or he wasn't trying to make excuses to get out of trouble?
I love that you asked that, because that's something that we hear over and over and over again from parents, from teachers, from therapists, from authority figures across the board, is the assignment of the word manipulative to kids who are in distress. And to that, I sort of say, and that sort of gets to the question here that's been asked, like, how do you differentiate can't versus won't? Kids want to please. Kids want the affection, acceptance of their caregivers. You know, from a clinical standpoint, if we look at it from the angle of Maslow's stages of development, but when you go from, one of the very first stages on that, the first stage is safety, the second stage is belonging. As human beings, we want to belong, and the first place that we get to belong is within our family. And so if a child is doing something that is so contrary to what everyone around them wants of them, I think it's fair to say that the default positions, Occam's razor suggests that the kid can't, because if they could, they would. And that level of remorse that comes afterwards is palpable for these kids. They don't want to have had that experience. They don't want to have done those things. And I think that that's very evident. And I know that we use that as a diagnostic tool. We use that as data when we're looking at diagnosing mental illnesses. To what degree is there remorse afterwards and distress over what has occurred? And I don't think kids are manipulative. I think kids are telling us what they need. And if we're not meeting their needs, then they're going to try whatever strategy they have at their disposal to get their needs met, just as we would. They just don't have the same communication skills that a grown adult has.
And I'm thinking about it, Elizabeth, as you're talking, that if a person, child or adult, is exhibiting these kinds of behaviors, they're clearly in distress. And if you respond to them with demands or consequences, that is not going to enable them to do any better. It will just add more shame. And so these principles are how to respond in the moment when the child is having those awful, awful sensations and emotions and behaviors that are out of their control. And we respond with empathy and compassion, modeling that for them. And so that then they learn that it's okay that they have these symptoms, not okay that these behaviors, they still regret them when they're over, but they learn to be compassionate toward themselves. And when they're compassionate toward themselves, they can actually grow and learn and develop. But if they're stuck in shame because they can't do what you're wanting them to do, that shame promotes shutdown and defiance and other things to kind of protect our sense of self.
I absolutely agree. And I also think it connects to the fourth idea here of respecting our children's journeys as their own. So often when our children don't do what we want, what we expect, what we've set out for them, we think that it's about us. And we think it's about our skill as a parent or our ability to get our children to, quote, behave. But in reality, it's not about us. It's about them. It's about their journey and their experience. And when we reframe our children's behavior, symptomatic or not, as being about their journey, it really can de-escalate the entire experience and make it so that we're more likely to meet them with empathy and compassion because we're not attempting to justify our own parenting.
It's just so like all of it is just, again, that relatable of, feeling like we have to justify ourselves over and over and over again. As I sit here and listen, it's heavy of knowing, that that's what so many parents feel like they have to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's because we've been judged as parents, because the dominant culture's way of evaluating good parenting is good behavior. And I just want to go state for the record right now that I think good parenting has nothing to do with good behavior. It has everything to do with equipping a child to be a healthy adult. So I'm much more interested in developing a kid on the inside than a kid on the outside. And so these principles help our children develop their own sense of control of their own lives, rather than trying to please or perform. And in the long run, that's going to actually produce better behavior, because I can attest from my own life that my 16-year-old is very collaborative and cooperative, because she has experienced me as wanting to work with her, that we're a team, that we both have the same goal of her life being her own and going as well as it can. And so she's not afraid to apologize or to ask for help or to regroup, because she's had this model for her for many years now.
There's a couple of questions here around this concept of remorse, and this is a great question here. Jacqueline asks, sometimes there's not outward regret. Shame can sometimes present as anger. Does palliative parenting still apply when there's not remorse? I know how I would answer this question, but I'm curious to hear from you two first. Jen, what do you think?
I don't always think that kids have that experience, going back to that. They don't always have the vocabulary to be able to express what they're thinking and their feelings. So I love that Jacqueline put, like, sometimes they're not able to express it. Like, you don't see it. But that doesn't mean that your child's not confused. That inner battle, sometimes I think with certain disorders, it's like, and especially when we're talking about mood dysregulation, that they can be many things all at one time. So you can have like high energy and be irritable and ragey, and you're like, get away from me. But at the same time, you're like, no, I need you. I mean, how confusing is that, right? And they don't have the ability to express that. So just because we're not seeing those symptoms, that we're not seeing those behaviors that are symptoms, just because we can't observe them with our eyes or hear them with our ears, doesn't mean that that's not what is really going on the inside.
And I guess I would add that I don't know about you, but I'm not usually instantly remorseful. And so I'm going to offer them the benefit of the doubt, right? And treat them with respect and compassion, like I would an adult in this situation. And what typically happens is when people are given that space to be themselves, then they come around, right? And they might not express remorse really specifically. But I think if you know a child well, you can tell, right? You can see it in their face. You can see when they're making an attempt at a repair in the relationship, even if they're not actually use words of remorse.
I'm kind of also thinking about perspective, from that child's perspective in that time, because they're not well in that moment, that they really may have felt wronged, and they may really feel very powerfully and see things a very specific way. But then given time later on, they may come around to a different type of thinking. But it's like being able to understand it from their perspective and in their shoes.
Well, and I think that Jacqueline asked a really great question there, in adding, that sometimes remorse and shame can be expressed in a very counterintuitive way with anger. And one thing that we often don't remember is that symptoms of mood disorders in kids, including depression, including mania and hypomania, confusion, that may come along with ADHD symptoms of not being able to pay attention. They often manifest themselves as irritability, low frustration tolerance, rigidity, refusals to try new things, go new places, do what's asked of them. There's an oppositional response to requests that we, as authority figures, are inclined to see as choices or as disrespect, when in reality, that's symptomatic behavior. And so a child who's not expressing remorse in the way that we would expect a neurotypical adult to express it doesn't mean they're not feeling it. And being able to make that reframe in your brain as a parent, that this isn't only about what I'm seeing, as Jen said, you can see with your eyes and hear with your ears, but that it's about what's going on inside the child. And Lisa, I think you make a really good point of saying we're going to give this child the benefit of the doubt. And I think as an adult, when we know people are angry with us, it's very hard to make ourselves vulnerable and express regret or remorse. It tends to trigger our own defensiveness, our own inclination towards anger to fight back and defend. But you can diffuse that pretty quickly as a parent by not approaching behaviors that you would prefer didn't happen with anger. Being able to approach it with compassion, with empathy. I know you didn't want to behave that way. What can we do to help you for next time? Is a way that you're not standing there trying to judge. You're leading with the assumption that your child needs help, or else they wouldn't have behaved that way in the first place. I want to just sort of check in with a couple of other questions here. There's a question from Bobby on, how do you handle a 13-year-old who has ADHD and dyslexia and is destructive? Catherine wrote, I'm hearing that we parents may be thinking we're outwardly regulated, but our children are picking up on our nonverbal cues, and we can be triggering them not to be remorseful because the parent is dysregulated. Very insightful comment, Catherine. We'll come back to that. So let's talk about that. This idea that that our own self-regulation plays a part in this, not to put blame or responsibility on the parent in that regard, but the fact that there's a dynamic between parent and child. And when we're talking about palliative parenting, we're talking about what kind of dynamic are we creating in the relationship between parent and child, and is it one that can be built upon? You're both nodding, so Lisa, go ahead and chime in here.
Yeah, well, it's number 3. We model and teach self-care, because if we aren't regulated, then it's really hard to share that regulation and help our child co-regulate when they are having symptomology. And we don't do it perfectly, for sure, or even well most of the time. But to the degree that I can stay grounded in the fact that my child's behavior is not a reflection of my poor parenting, but is a reflection of the symptoms of their illness, and respond with that compassion and compassion toward myself, that I have these parenting situations that my friends and family would have never experienced and have no idea what I'm enduring, and to allow to be what is, and then to be kind to myself and to my child. And in that way, I think I stay more regulated, and when I'm more regulated, then she can be more regulated.
Yeah, I had a conversation with a parent today, and I mean, I admitted that sometimes I have what I call adult tantrums. It's not a pretty side of me. I'm not proud of that sometimes. And so when I get dysregulated, I can see the anxiety that kind of revs up in him. And so, but thankfully now, and it took a lot of time, but because I was practicing palliative parenting, now my child's able to tell me, Mom, are you dysregulated? and so he is now using those same things on me. And so it's just kind of come full circle. And then he's able to actually say what he needs. And so we have some very specific strategies at home for him for how he can care for himself, that we have had to learn about that over time and be educated. And so now he's able to incorporate those things in himself and for himself, to take care of himself now that he's older. But it takes time to be able to cue that, and to be able to teach that. And so if I'm losing it because I'm upset and frustrated over something he can't control, I can't control, then I'm not recognizing what he needs to do in that moment to take care of himself. And so I just had to back up a bit so that I could stop. What does he need? Really pay attention to that, to teach him to do all those things. But I have to say, for me, that was really hard.
Listening to you both respond to this question, I'm reminded of a special education educator who was a part of our community, and she always used to talk about the fact that when our children sort of become escalated, the way to help them is for us to de-escalate ourselves, because when they spiral up and can't bring themselves back down, we have to be that soft place for them to land so that they can come back down, and they have a guide along that path back down. And when we spiral up with them and respond to their anger and their aggression and their dysregulation with our own, it's much harder to get that situation back to a manageable place. And I think, when we talk about modeling and teaching self-care, one of the things that's so important for parents who have kids with these kinds of challenges is that part of that self-care is talking to other parents, and being around people who understand the reality of what living with children who have disorders is like, because it's extremely isolating, and it can be really debilitating for parents' mental health to not have anyone else to turn to. And so I know that's one of the reasons why we really stress our support groups for parents, because it's a way for parents to find that kind of connection. Now, before we move on to the next section, I want to just address one other question here where Lisa asked, I'm wondering how we can apply these principles to support siblings or children that are fighting, arguing between themselves. And I would say that that palliative parenting is not specific to parents and children who have mood disorders. Palliative parenting is a philosophy that is applicable to any and all children, adult or elementary school age. That how we relate to our children influences how they behave, and their symptoms influence how they behave. And when we respond to our children with an understanding that sometimes it's symptomatic, but it is always an expression of need, I think that makes it easy to apply to any child of any age.
Hey, Elizabeth, can I just give a quick answer to that question about
Yeah.
ADHD and how
Sure.
and this applies? So I'll make some assumptions about how what kind of behavior that parent is seeing, but you can, whatever it is, inattentiveness, hyperactivity, and they're bouncing all over the place. If you first start with just knowing that they can't help it, right? It's not their fault and it's not willful. And so if you can start there, you're over halfway home, and then just respond with empathy around how hard it would be to be inside of a body that cannot sit still. And how hard would it be to have all these people around you wanting you to do certain things that you found too difficult. And then to lower your expectations about what's possible and create doable situations as much as you can. Like I know one teacher who, for one child with ADHD, she gave the child 2 desks and one on each side of the room. And so the child could move between them as often as he needed. So it's like, I just assume they're not going to sit still and plan that right in. So that's just a little, first attempt at that question.
Thank you for adding that, Lisa. I want to move on to the third section here, because I'm seeing the time and I want to honor the time that everyone is spending with us. And so the third sort of section of concepts here related to palliative parenting are how it relates to community. And we sort of already started touching on this with the ideas that isolation is something that needs to be broken down for our families. And so these principles are that we recognize that our children are more than just their illness. We advocate for awareness, acceptance, and accommodation. We're honest about our and our children's strengths and limitations. We facilitate collaboration among our children's support systems. We share strength, knowledge, and hope within our community. And this goes back, I think, to the question that was asked by Chris. How do you get schools to buy into this idea? I can only imagine the same criticism from schools. Jen, I think you have something that speaks to this.
Yeah. So when my child was first diagnosed with this illness, he was 6, and I was handing him over to. We were transferring from a private school to a public school because I believed heavily that they had more resources for him. And they had some initial information on him. And on the very first day that we arrived, the assistant teacher said, Mrs. Sevick, I just want you to know that I have a son the exact same age as yours. Only I don't need to use medication because I know how to parent. And I'll tell you that, like, honestly, it did sting. It was like a punch in the gut. Like, it just kind of threw me back for a minute. And I was stunned. I didn't really know what to say or how to respond. But then I realized, like, so she really believes, and this was not like any ill intent on her part, by the way. What I realized was that she really believes that when a child is born, universally, they're all a clean slate, and that it's up to parenting to mold what that kid is going to look like. And from my perspective, it was like, it was a richer history. It was more complex than that, right? So we had genetics going in, we had some environmental issues during pregnancy that were going on. There were some known serious medical conditions that were happening there. And then of course there was also like just situational things beyond our control, but all of these things were happening to this really tiny kid. And none of these things that were his fault, were anyone's fault, or, you know, but she really believed that it was like this parenting stuff when in reality it was just so much bigger than that. And they saw him initially like as like, you know, they could help me as a parent, but I also realized that eventually that they saw him as a diagnosis or an IEP or a 504, that they weren't seeing him as a whole child. I mean, that was my perspective. And to me, he was more than his diagnoses. He was more than whatever medical condition. So I did have to take him out of school. I did have to find what I call my village and my tribe, my people. So we did eventually find a wonderful Phoenix Arts, just this wonderful co-op community of other parents who accept him and see him. And they actually are open to understanding that his symptoms are symptoms, you know, that they're not willful. And if he says he's got to go and he's got to leave class, then he can leave class, because that's what he needs to do. But real quick, you know, when you talk about schools, and I've shared this with Elizabeth, it's like teachers are taught about behavior management, and really truly they are. And that all things, if they're a good teacher, that they're going to be able to manage these behaviors if they are their top professional selves. And so when they know that they have done everything they can do, and they've used every trick, and they have gone outside of the box to bring things inside to help this kid, and then they're like, why isn't this working? Then if they know that they've done everything and tried really hard, then from their perspective, it must be parenting. And so what I love about this, the palliative approach to that, is that there's a middle path, right? It's not a teacher, it's not the parents or the child. There's this middle road that we can take where we recognize that these are signs and symptoms of, if we pay attention, that we can learn about this and meet this child's needs, so that we can all have this ripple effect that happens then, that we can find peace and quality within the classroom setting and for the child and for everybody.
I couldn't agree with that more, Jen. You know, I want to sort of observe that everything with our children is so interconnected, that there is no way to separate what's happening at home from what's happening at school, from what's happening in the community, from what's happening with extended family and friends. And that's why this community piece is so important, is that, you know, we as parents are focused on helping our children succeed, but that we don't do it alone. I love how you say, you know, finding your village. You know, I come back to that image over and over and over again, that as parents of children with challenges, we are there to facilitate collaboration. We are there to help our child be seen as more than just their IEP, and really seek out, you know, found and build the community that our children need. And I want to take a minute to address some of the things that are in the comments. Someone wrote, I think that there's confusion when parents and caregivers are quick to say that their child can't, when they really can if they're empowered to do so. I see a lot of parents hindering their child's growth. You know, I think this goes back to something Lisa said a while ago, which is the idea that if you're attuned to the child, you can provide the appropriate scaffolding around their needs. And that, you know, there are the things that children have mastered, and then there are the things they have not learned how to do yet. And then there's the gray area in between. And that's where we provide those additional supports and accommodations so that they can go from something that they don't know how to do and slowly learn how to get there. But I think a key piece of that is remembering that no one is capable of doing what of being entirely consistent. You're never going to get anyone at anything who's going to perform exactly the same way they did yesterday and perform the exact same way tomorrow. And so being able to be attuned and say, look, they couldn't today, but maybe they will tomorrow. Or they were able to do this yesterday, but today they can't. And being able to meet the child, where they are in regards to that.
Oh no, I wanted to speak to that because I've heard that so many times, and I've seen that in other children that I've worked with, and in my own child, the feedback that I would get from teachers who would be genuinely confused. Well, but he could do that this morning and he could not do that this afternoon. Like, how convenient. They really thought of it as like that was convenient. It wasn't convenient for him. And what I learned, actually, it was biological. And what I recognize in other kids now is that it was biological, that when they can, they will. But in that moment, we just have to believe what they're saying so that we can build up that trust with them.
Mm-hmm. That speaks to another question here. It's sort of saying, who a person has set up this nature versus nurture sort of, and I think actually what we're saying is that yes, they are both a factor, but your nurture has to take the nature into consideration, that nurture cannot override nature, and that you have to be able to be responsive to that child's needs. I see a lot of comments here, great comments here, asking about sort of more specific scenarios, like with a child who's self-harming, or with a sibling who is traumatized, or responses that one would give to a teacher. And so I would say that we would love to get into every single one of these sort of specific scenarios. But unfortunately, we only have 4 minutes left and we don't have time. And so what I'm going to say is and there's also a question here about, Jennifer, to you specifically, what strategies you use when your child is overwhelmed and upset. And again, we would love to be able to get into that right now, but we can't because of time constraints. So what I would say is that, this is an opportunity with all of these questions to invite you all to participate in some of the other things that we offer. We have drop-in support groups every Tuesday. We have rotating folks who facilitate and mediate that session every Tuesday evening. And that's a place where you can come and you can ask these questions. Lisa facilitates one group, Jen facilitates another. We have other folks who come in and take them on other nights, and it's free of charge, but it's an opportunity for you to come and talk with other parents about some of these things and ask these questions. What do you do when your child is 18 and you don't have the legal right to get information from their doctors or have a say in what treatment they're receiving? Our drop-in group is a great way to start that connection with other parents to get information. What do you do about traumatized siblings? We're actually going to be doing a webinar later this year that's just about the effect on siblings and how to manage that. Jimmy Ferguson asked, how do you get a child tested, but when you know something is going on? That's another service that we offer. We offer a diagnostic consultation where we do assessments and we do interviews and we review pretty much any and all testing that you've already had done either through the school or through occupational therapy with your pediatrician, anywhere. And we comb through it all and we come to conclusions about what makes sense given the information. And then we help families understand that information and what they can do with it. And we advocate with them on their behalf with their providers. Yeah, so Rachel, I see your question about what do you say to a parent who has a child with a mental illness who doesn't believe their child should have accommodations? What is the response to a teacher who says that if they meet your child's unique needs, it's a problem because all the other children will expect special treatment? Again, I wish we had time to answer all of these. But, you know, some of our other services may be a way to get some of these questions answered for you. Bobby's asking, how do you get in on the Tuesday night drop-ins? If you follow us on Facebook, we're Children's Mental Health Resource Center on Facebook. If you follow us every week, we post links to register for those. Once you've registered for one session, you can come to any of the Tuesday night meetings that you'd like. You can also look at our website, which is CMHRC.org. There we have lots of free resources. We also have information about our programs, including the diagnostic consultation that I talked about, including our school advocacy program where we work with you to get your teacher and your school district and your special education department within your district to recognize the mental health challenges your child has. We have accommodations and interventions that we know are effective at supporting kids who have these special challenges. We attend IEP meetings, 504 meetings, parent-teacher conferences. We've done mediation, and so that's another way that we can help you make sure that your teachers are giving your child the support that they need. Again, someone has asked about written resources. You can go to our website, cmhrc.org/palliative-parenting, and that will give you information as well on what we've presented here. And again, if you have specific questions, you can email us at info@cmhrc.org. And one thing that I would say is that everything that we do is infused with these principles of palliative parenting. Everything that we do, from our diagnostic consultation to our school advocacy, to our community mental health advocacy, to our membership and support services, everything we do is infused with the idea that meeting our children where they are, meeting them with compassion and empathy, recognizing that their behaviors is information to us on the needs that they have, and making sure that we meet them. It's just infused into everything that we do. So if you're interested in learning more about this, please do check out our website and the palliative parenting section, but also come and participate in anything that we offer, because you will keep hearing this over and over again, and we will be sharing this in more depth in the future. This is not a one and done. It is very much at the heart of what we do. And so we will have many opportunities for more information to be shared on this topic. Wonderful. So, someone is asking, we don't provide mediation services. When a student and their family go into mediation with their school district, we can go and be an advocate with the family during that mediation with the district. If you're looking for someone to provide mediation and communication and education for your providers, your extended family, members of your community, we do that through our community mental health advocacy program. You can find information about all of these services and programs on our website, cmhrc.org, and you can even make an appointment for a free consultation directly through our website no waiting. I would let you know that we are going to be starting a palliative parenting course. It'll be 6 weeks long, and it will be starting this summer, where we will dive very much in depth into each of these sections, and providing parents with those specific strategies and tools that some of the questions were asking for. So if it's a service that's needed, we're here to help. I will also, just in final summation, let you know that we have another webinar coming up in May. It is a celebration of surviving and thriving with childhood mental illness, and that will be on May 17th, and we hope that many of you will be able to join us for that. I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us tonight. We are a nonprofit. These webinars are free to the general public. If you would like to access our webinar archive, you can do it through our membership program, which has a very small fee. You can also make a donation to support our work, and those contributions subsidize all of the services that we provide, because we provide them below market rates, specifically so that as many people as possible can access them. So please don't hesitate to reach out, and thank you so much for being here tonight and being part of this with us. Thank you, everyone. Good night.